Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Central Line for the second piece of this 2-episode conversation with Dr. Kate Toyer. If you haven't listened or watched part 1 yet, please go back and do that because we pick up right where we left off last time. And I'm going to give a language warning again because we both tell it like it is this hour. I also want to send a big thank you to CareCredit for their support of Central Line and of DEIB efforts in VetMed. As I've said before on this podcast, it's really easy for a lot of people to say, oh, they're diving into politics when we talk about DEIB, and in particular, LGBTQIA rights on this show or in other content we produce at AHA. But in truth, it's the proliferation of anti-LGBTQIA plus bills that are being considered or signed into law right now in over half the states in the US that make this a political issue. When a person who is not personally affected by these violations of human rights can zoom in and see that members of this community, of the LGBTQIA plus community, are working next to us. They're wondering if it's okay to be themselves around us. They're looking at us from across the exam table and wondering if we're able to give their pets best care, regardless of how they look or dress or whose hand they're holding. When we zoom in and see that we look at these individuals who are in our lives already, it should be easy to see that this is actually deeply personal and not political. And we cannot be our best as veterinary professionals without being fully comfortable bringing our whole selves to work. The real best medicine cannot exist without that. So I hope this conversation encourages you to speak up for someone you know, or speak up in a room when there's no one there to speak up for themselves, or if they don't feel safe to do so. And if you're struggling with this, and you want resources on how to be a better ally, or if you're a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, there's a full library of free resources over at pridevmc.org. So I encourage you to go check it out. They are doing amazing work over there, including the Gender Identity Bill of Rights and a whole lot of other good stuff. So head on over. And please enjoy this conversation. Happy Pride Month to all of you, and thanks, as always, for listening.
I think that's exactly it. It is a question of humanity, and I think at times, like, trans people get leveled at them, like, why do you make it always about politics? It's like, I don't want it to be about politics. I don't care. Like, I'm just trying to exist. I'm literally just trying to I'm just trying to live, and I'm just trying to live and contribute to society in the best way I know how. I just want to be included. And we're back to those themes of inclusion, aren't we? Sort of I really just want to be included. And I don't sort of, trans people don't wake up and go, I'm going to be a political activist today. I'll sort of, let's go out and do a course on this. There was I remember a really, there's a actress, Georgie Stone, who's who's quite, she's fairly big over here, sort of in Australia, but not so much in the US. She was very important, sort of was a part of was one of the legal cases, a little bit like in the US, you've had a couple of legal cases, can't remember, I think it's R.E. Kevin, but I could be wrong. Sort of, there's a couple of cases there that have been precedent cases. So Georgie's case, which was her original case was R.E. Jamie, which was basically, it sort of overturned a whole heap of requirements for having a court actually allow access to gender affirming care for trans youth in particular. She was interviewed by Clio magazine. Clio? I think it was Clio, one of those magazines, sort of, she was asked, why did you become an activist? And her response is pretty telling, because sort of her response was, I never actually decided to become an activist. As soon as I walk in the room, I'm an activist. As soon as I walk in the room, I am sort of basically I'm disrupting everything you thought society thought they knew about what people should do and how they should be and who they should be. So that's what it's like for trans people. And I think this goes to one of the things about why trans people are feared so much. And I think you did ask this question in one of the questions that you sort of sent through was like, why are people so afraid of trans and gender diverse people, sort of angry and or afraid. I think the anger comes from fear, to be honest. So I think the underlying issue is fear. Like sort of people are afraid of trans people. And I think it's because sort of I think there's a few things, but sort of and it is complex, but sort of I think we can break it down to a few things. Number one, they don't understand our lives, so sort of they don't see sort of and so for a vast majority of people, they don't know or care or love a trans person, and so they just haven't been exposed to all of those things, sort of, and so, well, they think they don't know a trans person. They do, but sort of,
right.
But I think the fear comes from, in a way, trans people, we're kind of the ultimate disruptors. We sort of, and it's not even deliberate. This is what I was sort of trying to get at with the Georgie Stone story, is that we don't do it deliberately, but just by being in the room, a trans person challenges everything you thought you knew about how society is structured. Every single piece of the way society is built. Our society is built on a binary gendered construction, with sort of, which is particularly, and it is still, I'm sorry guys, it's still fairly patriarchal and male dominated. And it's, it's not all men, but it's enough men that it's still there. Okay. And that is sort of how society is structured, and society doesn't like unpredictability. Business doesn't like unpredictability. We like to be able to predict, we're going to have X number of business, X number of clients next year, and we're going to make X amount of money or whatever. Trans people walk into that, and we go, oh, by the way, everything you thought you knew about gender and the way sort of and all of these assumptions you had that you've built your society around, it's actually all just an illusion. Like we're sort of where they're going, it's all changeable, sort of, and I think that's it's quite like time scary.
Zones in the work week.
Yeah, exactly. It's all an illusion.
Somebody just made it all up.
Someone made it all up. And that's scary when you've built your entire life around this and you're going, what? Hey, what? Sorry? Hang on. Can I take a sip? So I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from. And you can respond to that in a couple of different ways. You can respond to it by shutting down, and that's where the fear comes in. So when we get afraid of something, we tend to respond to it in one of two basic ways. We're going back to binaries, aren't we? But sort of we do tend to respond to fear sort of so we either sort of it's either the fight or the flight response, isn't it? So we either run away from it sort of or we fight it, and hence the anger. Sort of, so we sort of, so society and people sort of, they've got all these unconscious biases that have been impacting their lives, and they see this thing, and they're like, this is completely disrupting my entire future. I'm just going to try and pretend it either doesn't exist, or I'm going to fight against it. There's a third way to actually deal with that fear, though. And this is what I hope people can actually do. And that third way of actually dealing with that fear is to actually confront it. And to look in the mirror and go, okay, that fear is there. That fear is real. Like, it's a real emotion. It's sort of, but why? Why am I feeling that fear? What is it that I'm afraid of, and why am I afraid of it? And really examining that and going, can I face this, and does this need to be as scary? If I accept this change, if I learn more about this change, if I learn more about this new thing, can it lead to a space where I can actually grow as a person and actually sort of and become sort of a new sort of and hopefully better person by sort of by growing. And that's the pathway that I try and choose as much as I can. Sort of, it's certainly a pathway that I consciously, actively try and choose, but a pathway that I try and choose, and I try and encourage other people to choose as well, because the pathway of fighting or running, it's a no growth sort of pathway. It's if that fear is just blocking you from continuing on your journey through this life and actually growing and sort of and learning, running from it or fighting it that's not going to help you continue the sort of that life journey and continue to grow. That's the way I see it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And like, I do a lot of reading on like diet and wellness culture. That's like something that I've started to read about lately. And one of the things that they talk about is, when you have thoughts of either judgment towards yourself for not conforming to something that society says you should look like or that you should be doing, or if you're judging somebody else for that's learned behavior, right? Because we sort of become the air we breathe. And so if we've been breathing in this culture our whole lives, it's natural that our first reaction is going to be what we've been taught to feel. But then to actually examine that feeling and that fear or that feeling of judgment and say, okay, who's benefiting from this judgment? Am I benefiting from this? And is the person I'm judging benefiting from my judgment? Or is there possibly an agenda that's been, or an indoctrination that's been placed upon me to feel a certain way, and it doesn't actually benefit me or the other person? And in that case, your first reaction isn't who you are. It's how you've been brought up to think, and that doesn't have to be the end. And I just think about that so much here. How can we get people to stop and take that moment and think, okay, who's benefiting from this reaction, and how can I change it so that we both benefit?
Exactly. And I think the other thing is it's not easy. It's not easy. The easy pathway, the easy pathway is just to, as you say, kind of do what society tells you to do, because that's the easy endorphin rush. Like, you do the stuff that other people want you to do, and so you make them happy, and you get the endorphin rush of making them happy, and that's okay to do, but it is the easy pathway, as sort of, and sometimes I think we get lost in that. We can get lost in there and not really understand who we are, because knowing who we are, there will be people who won't like that. There will be people who will be upset. There will be people, and you don't know, because you don't know when you tell someone who you are and sort of you don't know if they're going to actually like that. Are they going to like you for who you are? You don't know that, and it's an incredible amount of trust to put that out there. Like, that's a huge amount of trust to go, this is who I am. And so, but doing that, when you do get the person who says, you know what, I see you, I see who you are, and I do, like, I love that person. I sort of, I like that person. I love that person. I love who you are. That relationship, that sort of, that interaction, and that sort of, that, it's so hard to describe that spirituality, that spiritual connection. I'm not quite sure what words to use, but that connection that occurs, that's worth 1,000 of the 1,000 of the being who someone else says you should be. And I think that goes for, that doesn't just go for listeners who might be gender diverse, sort of, that goes for allies as well, in terms of, sort of, for anyone, sort of, that being sort of, being who you sort of really looking at and understanding who you are as a person, it's challenging and it's hard, but the hard work has a pretty good payoff. And that payoff is those people who love you for who you are, they're your ride or dies. They are, they're never going to let you go. So regardless of pretty much regardless of what you do, they are always there for you. That connection is always there. And that's that's a pretty beautiful connection. So, yeah.
It is. You're so right. Like, it's worth 50,000 likes on your, meme, right?
Yeah.
Is that one moment of connection where you're like, this person sees me, and not only are they okay with it, that might even be why they love me.
Exactly.
It's like they take that whole package. It's not we love you no matter what. It's we love you because, and that is so powerful. And that was one question that I actually had sent you, because you were talking about, like, if you know who you are, you stand to lose a little bit when you tell that to people. But knowing who you are is such a powerful and empowering thing. And so I was wondering, just because so many of us go through life not trusting that inner voice, or it takes us a long time to find it. You heard that inner voice when you were very young. And it took you longer to actually act upon it because of society and wanting to feel loved. But you did, and you knew it was there. And that is such a rare thing to hear. And yet I feel like so many of us have been trained to not listen to that inner voice because it's telling us things that'll make it harder somehow for us to be comfortable. And do you find that and when I say comfortable, I mean comfortable in society, not necessarily comfortable in our own skin. But do you feel like that inner voice, that you have a deeper connection to that inner voice because of this experience and this life that you've had? Or do you still find it hard to connect with the voice sometimes, and know what you really want or what decision you should really make for yourself?
This is a really great question, and I absolutely love this question, partly because I don't know if I've ever been actually asked it before, but I think it is so vital because it really gets to the heart and the soul of all of this when it comes down to it, and I think that sort of. Yeah, like it took me a long time sort of to be comfortable brave enough. I don't like the term brave because I sort of it's just a term I sort of have challenges with, but to actually to listen to that voice and sort of and actually and do that. I think that society doesn't want us to know who we are. Because when we sort of because when we know who we are, we do become the social disruptors. We do challenge things, and so sort of the way our society has been built and structured, it doesn't want us. It wants us to behave in a certain way because that brings order sort of to the chaos, doesn't it? And sort of and there's certain benefits to that order, and there's certain sort of things that that we need to do because we need to be mindful and respectful of others as well. Do I think that having listened to that voice and continuing to listen, and I think that's also important as well. I'm a different person now to who I was 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I want to be different. I want to keep on growing. I want to keep on learning. So I constantly question and I constantly go to that inner voice. Like I'm doing it all the time, like literally sort of, what does this mean for who you are? Most recently, I think a good example was probably sort of had a very strong connection with a friend of mine who's profoundly deaf, a veterinarian who's profoundly deaf. And so that made me examine really who I am sort of just as an able-bodied person, like sort of, what does that actually mean? Sort of, what are the assumptions that I make about the world because I am able-bodied and I don't have to sort of encounter sort of things like having to have captions and sort of stuff like that to be able to interact with certain things. So I am doing it constantly. I do think it means that this probably sounds quite boastful and braggy, but I do think it probably means that I'm slightly better at, this doesn't say I'm perfect at it all the time, but I'm probably slightly better at detecting, I'm going to try and call it falsehoods, but it's not quite the right term. I'm good at understanding when people are doing things because they think that it's what they should be doing. They sort of, if that makes sense. So
you have a good bullshit detector, is what you mean.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, as a good bullshit detector. And even a good detector of when people who genuinely believe that they sort of they believe the things, and it's just because they haven't really questioned anything. They just haven't questioned the assumptions underlying that. Like it's sort of I'm fairly good at picking that up. So does it mean that I'm sort of and I still like there are people that I meet and it's like you've got some growing to do, but there's a good heart down in there. Like sort of, you've got a whole heap of society assumptions that have just, as you say, like sort of, these are all learned things, like sort of, and most people that sort of we interact, if we're 30 years old, most people we interact with have had 30 years. If you're old like me and we're 50, most people have had 50 years worth of society sort of basically sort of pummeling these sort of these things into them, that sort of these assumptions into them. But I do sort of try and look to where people's heart actually is, rather than where sort of where their mind actually is. Because if they've got a good heart and they've got a good soul, then they can usually sort of help them see some of the assumptions and help them sort of start that journey to actually question those assumptions and go, okay, does that really match up with, all these things I've been told? Does that really match up with what I actually believe in my heart? So I think that it is definitely having to really consider and look at myself a lot, and I've sort of done that a lot. Like you sort of you don't wake up and transition and go. You don't wake up and go, I'll be a girl today. That sounds like fun. Sort of, that's,
it's been nothing but easy and fun.
Nothing but easy and fun. Sort of, that sounds like a lark. Let's do that for a while. There's an insane amount of like self-reflection and sort of looking at myself sort of really deep down and trying to understand who I am sort of about this whole journey. And I think a lot of veterinarians don't actually do that because it's kind of easy to cruise through life without doing that. Sort of, and I did for a while. Like I'd sort of, when I buried all of this, sort of back when I was 14, 15 years old, and I buried it all, and I managed to cruise through life for 25 odd years, sort of without really questioning who I was and just doing all of the things society told me I should do to be a good person, sort of a good and successful person. And I think a lot of veterinarians do that. I think that we sort of, for a variety of reasons, I think that we do, we cruise through sort of life doing all of the things that society tells us we should do in order to be successful and good, a good vet and a successful vet. Without really looking at who we are and sort of as a person. So, and I think that sort of I encourage veterinarians to do that, because I think when you do that, when you know who you are, there's a power in that sort of, and a happiness. I'm not sure. There's a calmness and a spiritually calm place that you get to.
It reminds me of what you said when you were talking about, like, you could walk down the street and people could, say things to you or, show you behavior that isn't supportive in the street. And you can bounce it off because you know who you are and you're comfortable and you have a support system. And deep down, you know, this is all just bullshit, right? And you are who you are and you have a good life. And I think that sense of just like, you're almost bulletproof to most things, of just like all the stuff that life throws at you. That is a really, really empowering feeling. And I know now what people say, like when you get older, like as you get older, if you're lucky enough to sort of sink into that sense of self, that like getting older isn't as scary because it comes with such a gift, which is not worrying so much about the stuff that doesn't matter and allowing yourself to just be who you are. And that's the best gift that I could think of in life, is just to have that security with yourself that no matter what happens, you know who you are. But that's not to say that we can't help people get there, right?
No, totally.
If you have friends who are struggling.
Absolutely. And sort of, and it's not sort of, it's not that I've had times in the last 7 years where I've been on the bedroom floor crying, because of some shit that's been sort of we've really blown the sort of swear meter now, haven't we? Because of some absolute crap that's that's been published in like a local, like mainstream media or sort of or something like that, or whatever. It's not to say that there's not those times of challenge and sadness. They're still going to be there. But there is a space where you can, like you say, sink into a sort of a sense of self and calmness of knowing who you are that can act like it can be pretty well almost bulletproof. And sort of so you can just brush it off. And I think it sort of at times as veterinarians we're attacked by clients, like like we get flame attacked on social media by clients or whatever. And I do see veterinarians at times responding to that, and they said, and it is upsetting. Like, sort of, don't get me wrong, like it's upsetting when a client attacks you. Doesn't feel good at all. You're only in it for the money. You don't care. Take your pick. Like, we can rattle off the top 10 quotes. It's like they've got some sort of central QAnon database. They get them off. But I see I do see veterinarians get upset about it, and I'm just like, oh, they're just like, those people aren't worth it. Like, you just have to walk away from that. Like, you really just have to walk away from that. And it's like, and I think we get upset, and we get we get more upset about that stuff the more importance we place on that client actually liking us. Which is why I think it's so important to actually have that inner sense of who we are and actually liking and loving ourselves. And that's we're now deep into religious spirituality theory, aren't we? And and self-care and whatnot.
We've covered a lot of ground today, Kate.
Covered a lot of ground, But yeah, and I think that I do see that, and I hope that those veterinarians can start to see and go, and I do encourage anyone who's listening who gets into that space, just try and reflect on who you're. A good person. You don't become a vet if you're a horrible person. Like, you just don't do that. You're actually a good person. Yeah. And maybe you maybe you haven't really thought about who you actually are, and maybe you need to do some work on that and go and speak to, like, I don't know, counsellor, priest, imam, whoever like that is, about some sort of guru on the internet. I'm not sure, but whatever's your fly. Maybe you need to do that, but underneath and in there, you're a really good person. You really are a good person, because if you weren't a good person, you wouldn't care about animals. Okay? And I think you need to hold on to that and know that these attacks, these things from the outside, they will pass. They will they will go away. And just, you need to hold on to that central thing of, like, I am a good person, and I do care. And maybe examine and just go, okay, did I really express my caring that well? Okay, maybe sometimes we've got to actually we look at that, we've got to change our behaviour because we're not that great at listening, say, or something like that. But underneath it all, you're a good person. So I hope that your listeners really understand that.
I hope so too, because I fully believe that, and I think that's what Ewan meant when they said, that with education and with some work, this could be the most welcoming and inclusive profession.
Oh, yes.
Because we are made up uniformly of good people. I mean, I've not met somebody who chose this profession, like you said, who isn't at heart a good person. And we all see like the animal that is different, or that nobody wanted to adopt, or that, is somehow not like the perfect animal. And we all want that animal. Like that's the one we pick out, right? But
I know, right?
We need to show that compassion. I have, my Chihuahua, my ex-husband used to say failed quality control, which is absolutely true. And I love him so much. He's like the most perfect dog in the world to me. And we have to turn that compassion and that just love for people just being who they are on each other. CareCredit and Pets Best are proud to sponsor this podcast. They believe Pride Month is an important time each year to reflect and motivate individuals to advance fairness and equality and empower all people to be their authentic selves, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. The CareCredit credit card and Pets Best are here with friendly, flexible solutions to empower all types of pet parents to be financially prepared for a lifetime of care. I've taken too much of your time already. I'm so sorry. Like, I could talk to you all day, and I'm so thankful that you've had this time to spend. Like, I hope we haven't,
no, that's okay. We're sort of,
something you're supposed to be
I've
doing,
got,
I love this conversation.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation as well. I hope that the listeners enjoy it. I really do. I haven't got any hot tips. A hot veterinary tip. Veterinary tip for the day. I'm about to do a TPLO. There's a thing called an Osability TPLO guide. It's really awesome for TPLOs. If anyone's in a surgery, send me an email. Just genuinely just makes the whole thing so much easier. There's the hot veterinary tip. It's now a veterinary podcast.
I feel like in Australia, you must see a lot of like bites by things that are trying to kill you, because I feel like Australia is just full of like animals that are trying to kill you in some way. And so I feel like you're probably really good at treating snake bites or like bites by very large insects or spiders. Is that just a misconception, or is that true?
No, it's probably reasonably accurate. I think there's I remember actually being going into a forest walk one day up in the tropics, and there was like a sign. It was like talking about there's a tree called the stinging tree here, and you've got to be careful about it, because you can actually, if you get stung by it, you can actually have a heart attack and and die from a heart attack. It has been known to happen. Yeah, and literally, this guy was
trying to kill you.
Yeah, this guy was reading it in front of it, and said he was this English guy, and said, "Is there anything in this bloody country that doesn't try and kill you?" And I think it was probably reasonably accurate.
Okay, so some generalizations exist for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. So, yeah.
Kate, I had one. So to close out, would you mind? Like, I know that you have been really involved in trying to expand like the LGBTQIA plus community in Australia and I guess the South Pacific. You're going global now with this podcast. So,
exactly.
But that's where I found you, was on LinkedIn when Pride VMC was talking about, I think, the conference that you were involved in. So would you mind just talking a little bit about that? And also, if anybody listening wants to get involved in any of the initiatives that you're involved in, if you could let us know about those. And I'll be sure to put them in the show notes too.
So, totally. So the conference was called the Veterinary Kaleidoscope Summit. So the Veterinary Kaleidoscope started as a podcast with myself and co-host and co-founder Cam Raw, who's an Australian Aboriginal veterinarian, Palawa man, and basically we started the podcast because we wanted to hear the voices from diverse people. People who hadn't necessarily, in the veterinary industry, who hadn't necessarily had their voices heard, because we do hear a lot from experts. We hear a lot from, which is cool. Like, that's okay. Sort of, but we don't hear a lot from people from diverse backgrounds. And so we had, our first episode was with the absolutely gorgeous Alex Harrison, who is a profoundly deaf veterinarian I was talking about earlier, who we recorded a podcast with a profoundly deaf veterinarian. Sort of, I think it's the first.
I love that.
I know. I think it's certainly the first time in the veterinary in veterinary podcast world that had actually been done. And then we recorded we've done a few others. Veterinarian who's bipolar, professor of microbiology who's bipolar, some gender diverse vets, some neurodiverse veterinarians. We did a lovely interview, actually. If anyone wants to look it up, it's absolutely beautiful interview with the gorgeous Soraya, who was the past president of WASAVA, who is just the most, oh my goodness, that lady, I could speak to her all day. She's just amazing. One of those people who you speak to them and you're just filled with a spiritual calmness. You are just so so calm when you're speaking to them. And you just feel like, oh my God, at the end of it, you feel like you're so enlightened, which quickly sort of disappears as you sort of go about your daily work. But, that's okay. You can come back and listen to the podcast.
All right. It's
so
there.
Anyway,
I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, totally. So that became, so I came up with this really crazy idea. We had such a good time talking to these people via the internet. We're like, what if we could talk to them face to face? And what if we could get all of them in the one room? Like, sort of get all of these people in the one room and actually just see where the conversations went. And so we came up with the Veterinary Kaleidoscope Summit idea, which was, quite frankly, possibly one of the most incredibly madcap ideas I've come up with just yet. Still working, see if I can sort of exceed that. But so I had this idea. Cam, who's just absolutely gorgeous, was like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that." And so we then went to my beautiful wife, Tara Cashman, who, apart from being a veterinarian, is also an events organizer. And I like to say...
Oh, it's very handy.
Yeah, very handy. Exactly, right? My own private events organizer. Tara is my believer. Tara is the person who believes in me. I'm good at believing in other people. Like, I'm good at sort of believing that they can do things, and actually sort of and giving them and showing them that they sort of that they can do that, and sort of it's like, you can do this. Like, I'm good at sort of doing that. Tara is my believer. She's the one who believes in my stupid ideas, and somehow manages to turn them into a reality. And so we turned it into a reality of a 2-day face-to-face summit, which I'm going to claim bragging rights. We're going to claim bragging rights over MCVMA, who did have the first online diversity and inclusion summit with Rise in 2020, which is an amazing conference. And if you sort of, I believe it's going to be happening again in 2023. Pretty sure, I'm not sure when, but sort of, if you get a chance, listeners, definitely make sure you sort of hook into that if it's online again, or if they do sort of do a face-to-face one, that would be just absolutely incredible. But we're going to claim bragging rights that we were the first face-to-face sort of dedicated D&I conference in the veterinary space. And yeah, we had 2 days of diverse voices. We had over 15 speakers or panelists from various diverse backgrounds, culturally diverse, multilingual, neurodiverse, physically diverse, LGBTIQA, the works, and we and we had this summit, and we talked about our stories. We talked about what we dreamed the veterinary profession could be. So we structured around what were 3 themes: were gather, dream, amplify. We stole those themes off World Pride, but they gave us permission because we actually paid to be a part of the Pride Amplified program. But so we gathered to tell stories. We dreamed of what an inclusive veterinary profession would look like. And then we amplified our voices and our actions to actually make those dreams happen. And yeah, it was amazing and it was incredible, and it will be happening again in 2024. It won't be happening again this year, because it took an insane amount of organising Sydney Mardi Gras Parade for World Pride, a float in Sydney Mardi Gras Parade for World Pride, Fair Day, a stall at Fair Day where there were 70,000 people came through Mardi Gras Fair Day in one day, and wow. Then also TVK Summit, all within a period of 10 days, was probably not the smartest thing for my mental health. So we we won't quite do that again. So we'll probably push. We live and learn. We'll probably push TVK Summit off to. We'll push it back into the middle of 2024. Get it away from our Mardi Gras festival, which in Australia we generally hold that in February just because the weather's warmer and Australians don't like rain. And it was all about trying to I guess walk the walk, walk the talk, so to speak, and about what do. And if listeners would like to be, if they are in our corner of the world, then there is a TVK website. If they just search the internet, they'll find that. There's also ARVA, Australian Rainbow Vets and Allies, has a website, and you can actually join Australian Rainbow Vets and Allies. You don't have to identify as LGBTIQA to join. Allies are welcome to join, hence Australian Rainbow Vets and Allies. So there's us there. There's obviously our wonderful sibling organisations, Pride VMC in the US, who you've already had multiple guests on, I think, from Pride VMC, and BVLGBT in the UK and European region. And we all communicate, we do communicate and talk about things, particularly when there's stuff that kind of impacts globally, like the Gender Identity Bill of Rights. So we've we do, ARVA is doing the advocacy for Gender Identity Bill of Rights within the context of the Asia Pacific, Australia and New Zealand in particular. So, those are, look up those organisations. There's also some wonderful organisations, particularly in the US, MCVMA, the Native Veterinary Medical Association, the Black Veterinary Medical Association. In the UK, there's actually I believe there's a, it's not called multicultural, but they do have like a multilingual multicultural veterinary association, as well as an association for veterinarians with disabilities, which I'm not sure if there's one of those in the US at this stage, as far as that goes.
I don't think so. I'll have to check into it. I know there's a Facebook group that a lot of veterinarians with disabilities belong to, but I don't actually know if there's an association yet. If there isn't, there should be.
Yeah,
Hint
totally.
to any change makers listening in
Yeah,
the US.
definitely. And I think that sort of I think sort of if I were able to finish off on this, I think, and the reason for TVK Summit is that, I mean, I can speak from a trans experience, sort of that LGBTQIA sort of type of perspective, but obviously I don't know what it's like to have grown up as a person of colour. I don't know what it's like to have grown up as a person who English is not their primary language. They're multilingual and they speak sort of multiple other languages. Hell, I only speak one language, English. Sort of, frankly, anyone who sort of English as a second language, as far as I'm concerned, should actually be a compliment. That means you're speaking at least two languages. So I don't know what it's like to have a disability, but what I can do is I can listen to those people. What I do genuinely believe is that our profession needs to reflect the communities that we serve. We need to be representing and reflecting those communities. So I want to see Black veterinarians. I want to see Native American veterinarians, Latinx veterinarians. I want to see veterinarians with disabilities. I want to see veterinarians. I want to sort of see veterinarians who are neurodiverse. I want to see veterinarians who don't speak English. Certainly not as their primary language. I want to sort of, as I said in the sort of thing, what guys be, I want to see a blind veterinarian, sort of, which is kind of sort of, excuse the pun, anyone who is listening and who's sort of who's sight impaired, but I want to challenge everything that we think has to be for a veterinarian, every assumption we make about what a veterinarian is. I want to challenge all of that, and I want to go, okay, is that really true? Sort of, what can a veterinarian who is deaf, what can a person who is blind teach us about sort of about veterinary work? What can a person who's neurodiverse, who is bipolar, what can they sort of what can they bring to the table? What can a veterinarian who is Black or a person of colour, what can they bring to the table, and not make them, not sort of go, oh, that's amazing, sort of, you've done so well despite being sort of, Latinx and sort of, and English being your second language, but actually sort of going, holy crap, wow, that's amazing, sort of, you're speaking Spanish, and sort of, for instance, do you know that Estonian, the language Estonian, doesn't actually have gendered pronouns, sort of, which is kind of cool. So people from Estonia, people from Estonia, when they actually speak English, very, very easily slip into sort of, can actually use non-binary pronouns, they, them, theirs. It's very easy. Sort of. So I want to know that. I want to know what sort of. I want to know what a deaf veterinarian brings to the table, and they sort of, Alex has brought so much. Like, we did the entire TVK summit. I think we mentioned this earlier in the podcast. We had live captioning. Now, Alex was the only veterinarian who we knew had an obligate need for live captioning, sort of, but our post-summit survey responses, more than 50% of attendees actually used the live captioning, which is like, okay, wow. So let's sort of see what the things that these people can bring to the table, not go, that's really good that you got here, despite being deaf or, sort of mobility impaired or whatever that is. So, yeah, that's what TVK is all about.
I love all that.
Yeah. So hopefully people like it. And if they want to like it, as you mentioned, there will be links in show notes
Yep, there will be. Is it going to be in Australia?
Yeah, it will be in Australia. It was sort of
okay.
It's a
good reason to go to Australia.
Look, totally. Come to Australia. Mind you, we're putting it in winter, which is probably not the best time to visit Australia. But you can always go to Cairns. It's always hot in Cairns and Darwin. So we sort of. So it will be in Australia probably at this stage, probably in Pride Month, like in June. So it's probably when we'll sort of target. That's the time frame that kind of matches. So yeah, make your plans. 2024 June, Australia. Head on over if you want to come over a little bit. Sort of, I think the Australian Veterinary Association National Conference will be probably around a similar time, late May, sort of early June. So you can probably make an entire trip of it and write the airfares off on your tax. I'm sure that you guys still do that sort of thing over there in America, don't you? Write off airfares against tax for doing CE.
Sure. For business, yeah.
Yeah, it's for business. I'm not giving sort of a disclaimer. I do not give American tax advice. I don't give tax advice to anyone.
That's one thing you don't do. All right.
That's one thing I definitely don't do. But so please do that. And please sort of, I'm going to touch on one last thing. There's challenges in the US at the moment for trans and gender diverse people. It's not an easy space to actually be in. And I hope that what any of your listeners get out of this is that we're not political activists. We're not trying to defraud sort of women of rights. We're not trying to do sort of anything like that. We're not trying to influence children to sort of and tell sort of every child that they need to be trans or anything like that. We're just people. We're just people who are just trying to actually who are just trying to live in this world and in society, and we just want to be a part of society and a part of everyone's lives. And I think sort of if the listeners can approach that with compassionate kindness and a curiosity, a compassionate curiosity about sort of who trans people are, and we're not that hard to find. There'll be trans communities around where you are. Sort of go and meet some trans people. Like, we're not scary bogey bear people who are sort of who are shouting with placards all the time. We do that occasionally, but sort of usually just because it's almost impossible for us not to, and to still sort of exist and live. We're actually just people. And so I'd like your listeners to actually to do that and sort of go out and learn about trans people and sort of learn about our lives and our community. And I think if you do that, yeah, you might be surprised. You might be surprised at the people you meet, sort of, because there are some really, really amazing trans and gender diverse people out there, and they are just gorgeous and an absolute pleasure to know.
Well, Kate, you are one of them, and I really appreciate you spending so much time with us, because that's one reason why I wanted so much to have you on the podcast, and I wanted you to be, one of our women to watch, because we're recording this in March, which is Women's History Month. And it's because I wanted people to feel after this podcast like they know you. Because I think podcasts have a power that, some other, like a written article doesn't have, where you hear people talking and you feel like they're talking to you and with you. even though you're not saying anything. And I feel that way anyway. Like, I always have to remind myself that I don't know people that I've heard on podcasts. So I just really appreciate you telling your story and being so candid and so generous with your time, and willing to come on here, because I've enjoyed it. And I know there'll be people who leave this conversation feeling like they've met you.
Thank you. And I sort of, I agree. I think it's sort of, nothing beats face to face, and hopefully one day sort of that can happen. Yeah, I hope people do sort of get a little bit of a sense, of who I am. Sort of, so now you can say, all your listeners, you can actually say you do know a trans person. Yay! And thank you so much for spending so much time, because it is sort of, I know, like, sort of, we have spent a lot of time. I don't envy your editor. I've got, goodness knows how they're going to get this down to sort of something vaguely sort of.
We might have to bisect it. We might have to have it release it. That would be release it
episodically, sort of a bit like a Jane Austen novel.
Right, exactly.
But yeah,
I think that's a series.
There we go. Thank you so much for actually having me on. It has been an absolute pleasure, and it's been wonderful to talk to you. So thank you so much.
For me too. Thank you, Kate. And I will drop a whole lot of links in the show notes. If I forget something, or you have more questions, you want to talk to us about something, you can always reach me at podcast@aha.org. So reach out, and I'm happy to pass on any questions or comments, feedback to Kate as well. But I will try to put as much as I can in the notes. And hopefully everybody enjoyed getting to know Kate as much as I did. And thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next time on Central Line.